Hello, everyone that has tuned in from near and far to join us for this first Futures seminar hosted by the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. My name is Nicklas, I'm a senior advisor and I work to cultivate anticipatory capabilities for individuals and organizations. And I'm going to take you through today's program of this first Futures seminar. Not only are we launching this series, we're also reintroducing our Futures membership for individuals that are curious about developments of tomorrow and that want to strengthen their Futures literacy. I also have to say that I don't think we have ever experienced a higher number of participants to an event like this, and we're super excited that you want to spend the next hour together with us, where our main focus is the new report called Global Megatrends. Before we get to it, I want to welcome both old friends of the Institute and new ones that are engaging with us for the first time. And for that, it serves the purpose to briefly say that we are an independent and non-profit futures think tank, and we were founded about 50 years ago by former OECD Secretary General Thorkild Kristensen. Today, the Institute operates globally across the public, private, academic and civic spheres. We like to describe our line of work as equipping and inspiring individuals, organizations, decision makers, and the public to act on the future today. Essentially, it's about strengthening organization future preparedness and futures literacy. We have a broad range of activities within the field of future studies, from advisory services to courses, talks, publications, events, and we initiate different sorts of futures-oriented initiatives. We work across the organizational and institutional spectrum, and we are proud to say that our members and partners spans from local companies to multinational organizations and intergovernmental bodies as well as all the curious individuals that around the world are subscribing to the futures through the Institute's publications. Now, as I already mentioned, today is about launching this series, which we call Futures Seminars. Here we will provide a variety of insights on how to use the future in different ways. We will have 10 annual seminars, and some of these will be open and some of them will require a Futures membership, which we will circle back to later. You will get the chance to meet our futurists, our researchers, and our practitioners. We will also invite special guests that will take you on different journeys into the future. Today it's about global megatrends. In March it's about public anticipation. And in April we will focus on foresight and strategy. We will invite you all to these different sessions, and we hope you will join us for each and every one of them. Now, let's get to it. Today it's about megatrends, as I mentioned already. They are high-level drivers of change that will greatly impact societies in decades to come. They are massive in scale and they have effects that are felt across the globe. And while we can argue that in a principally unpredictable world, these trends can set out to be the only relative certainty that we actually have. And to present today's material, beyond myself, we have Casper Pedersen, who is head of publications, and we have Timothy Shoup, who's a senior advisor, and last but not least, we have Mathias Bjørnhof, that is head of partnerships and memberships. Casper will introduce the work into the report, the Global Megatrends report, while Tim will share some of the content and how to work and use megatrends in an applied fashion. Before we go into a Q&A with the audience that are with us on YouTube, remember to post any questions and comments you have, and we'll make sure to address them to the speakers in the Q&A. And finally, Mathias will present our Futures membership and he will wrap things up around the next Futures seminar, where we will try to explore how to democratize the field, the discipline, of future studies. And without further ado, I want to hear if you're ready, Casper, to take us into the work that you've been doing.
I am. Thank you, Nick, and it's good to be with you all. So we're here to talk about megatrends. What are they? Why should we care about them? And how can they be useful for understanding the future in a general sense, and also for organizations who want to use them as a tool to approach decision making about the future? So, as you already mentioned, Nick, this seminar marks the release of our brand new scenario report on this topic titled Global Megatrends. It's been underway for 3-4 months now, so we are so excited to finally be able to present it to all of you. If you want to have a chance to read it after today's talk, it's going to be available in our online shop and to members as well. So we'll share links for that toward the end of the presentation. Now, what are megatrends? Let's get into it before we dive into the trends themselves. Just to reiterate what Nicklas said just before, they are major pathways of change. They're global in scope. They're often interconnected. They have a time horizon stretching at least 10, 15 years into the future. They are massive in scale, and their effects are felt across the world. So they provide us with some degree of certainty in a relatively uncertain future, you could say. So, as a way of working with the future, megatrends go all the way back to the 70s to a gentleman by the name of Herman Kahn. He was a pioneering futurist, and he saw the work description of a futurist as drawing up scenarios to cope with the future, or rather to cope with history before it happens, as he put it. And he saw megatrends as an absolutely integral part of this work, although he didn't coin the term. That came later in the 80s with another fellow by the name of John Naisbitt, who published a book in 1982 called Megatrends. This is just to say that working with megatrends is a tradition that goes back decades. It's not exactly something new, but you could say it has stood the test of time. But that's the past. What about today? What about the future? What you see on the next slide is our 15 megatrends that we work with at the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, all of which are explored in some depth in this report. Now, some of these megatrends are relatively straightforward because they are quantifiable. So take population growth, urbanization, environmental change. These are trends for which we can extrapolate data, we can construct formulas, and we can extend current trends out into the far future. We can disagree about methodology, we can have long discussions about what the impacts of these trends will be, especially when we consider how they intersect and what happens when we add human decision making into the mix. But there's little disagreement about the general thrust of these more quantifiable trends. Then there are other megatrends that are a little more tricky to work with, typically ones that have to do with societal change. So we could point to individualization and empowerment as one example of this. For trends like these, we can't rely on numbers alone. We have to rely on aggregation of smaller trends that sort of build up together and point in the same direction and thus support the overall megatrend. So, although megatrends do give us some degree of clarity, they rarely unfold in a linear way. And to illustrate, I want to talk about globalization for a little bit. It's one of the 15 trends we work with, and I think it's a megatrend that you all have some understanding of. So, on the face of it, and judging from events in the last, say, 5 years or so, I think you could make a pretty good case that globalization may have been stalled or may have even reverted, judging from the last half decade or so alone. You have a major economy leaving the European Union, you have a trade war between the US and China, and of course, most recently, you have a global pandemic shutting down borders worldwide, disrupting supply chains, disrupting flows of migration and travel, and so on. So, again, judging from the last 5 years alone, I think you could make a pretty good case that globalization has stalled or perhaps even reverted. But if we take the long view, And if we look at globalization as sort of a deeper historical trend, instead of something that began recently in the 20th century, these more recent events kind of fade in the background a little bit. So if we consider the world 100 years ago compared to the world of today, it's hard to dispute that we have not become more globalized, interdependent, interconnected, not because of one single factor, but due to a number of things that compound and all support the overall trend. These things are things like growing migration, improved global infrastructure, innovations in communications technology, and so on. So, to briefly sum up, in order to understand change in the long term, we need to look beyond the short-term noise. There are still plenty of uncertainties connected to megatrends. Taking globalization again, one of the big questions we explore in this report is, will it be the West or will it be China that drives forward global integration in the decades to come? That's a big unsolved question, and we'll have to see how that unfolds in the years to come. Of course, the future is not determined by megatrends alone. We also have to add human decision-making into the mix, but they provide an important vantage point for working with the future in an informed way. So with that, I think it's time to get back to the studio, back to my colleague Timothy, who will dive a bit further into the megatrends themselves.
Perfect. So thank you, Casper. Thank you, Nicklas. Thank you to everyone out there joining us in cyberspace, soon to be the metaverse, or whatever comes after the metaverse. We're glad to have you with us. We're excited to share with you the conclusions and findings from our latest scenario report, which reflects our new, updated global megatrends framework. I want to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes sort of walking you through some of the different ideas and trends coming out of that. But before we jump to that, I want to set the stage, lay the groundwork for how we think about trends at SIFS, because it is not necessarily the way that others think about trends. In doing so, I want to introduce the concept of ecosystems. Now, the term ecosystems comes to us from the biological world. It is the way that plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, and everything go together in a delicate balance oftentimes and affect and influence each other. And the thing about ecosystems is they're often very difficult to predict. They might be in a period of stasis for a given period of time, and then they reach a certain critical threshold and they rebalance or change abruptly. The term ecosystems has gradually migrated into the human sphere of influence and the way that we talk about political and economic systems, societies and social systems and governance, and of course businesses, supply chains, industries, and sectors, all fitting together in an ecosystem approach. But the takeaway is that these are complex, dynamic systems, right, that don't necessarily fit neatly into buckets or categories or structures. And what happens in one area can have a huge impact on what happens in other areas, regardless of what the ecosystem is. Often there's a temptation to think about trends in terms of a hierarchy and to take a highly quantitative approach to trend identification, trend analysis, trend assessment, right? How long has a trend been around? Is it centuries or even millennia? Is it just a couple decades? Is it a much more recent development, right? How broad is it in scope? Is it global, local, regional, national, international, and so forth? And who is it addressed by and who does it influence? And to take these criteria and assess what a trend is and where it fits. This is a nice way to approach trends, but trends are not always qualitative or quantitative. There's a very qualitative approach that we take. If you look at other groups of megatrends, some people use 5 or 7 or even 10. The 15 megatrends that we have developed in this report are the result of a lot of these judgment calls that do not fit nicely into a trend hierarchy. Here's another example of a trend hierarchy, which is not just the megatrends themselves. If we think about network economy and all the different things feeding into network economy in terms of primary, secondary, and industry trends, we have a nice little umbrella framework. But it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're looking at knowledge of everything or predictive analytics or network society and so on, right, that this particular area only influences the level above it or only influences this particular ecosystem. Again, what can happen in one area, even within a small trend, may affect a supposedly completely unrelated megatrend. So, why do we look at megatrends and how do we look at megatrends? Well, we take this ecosystem approach. Everything is interrelated, interconnected, interdependent. Again, what happens in one area may have significant impact on what happens in other areas, right? What is the impact on globalization of environmental change and sustainability? How do we think about economic growth and the way that that is changing on the basis of new economic models? How will engineering advances impact the way we generate resources, how the population ages, and so forth? The point in looking at global megatrends is they don't exist in a vacuum. They don't necessarily exist in particular predictable directions. They are trajectories that impact how the future will develop. And it's something that we talk about at SIFS each and every day. But when we talk about paving the road to the future, it is really the foundation laid by global megatrends and how they interact and interrelate with one another. So with that said, with that as the framework, the foundation, I want to take you through a select subset of the global megatrends that in our latest report and talk with you a little bit about what they mean in terms of implications and kind of the questions that they raise. Within our framework of 15, which we've categorized across world, people and society, technology and science, and economy, we'll talk a little bit about environmental change and sustainability, the biotechnology revolution and where that is at in process, and of course, greater interconnectedness, what that has meant for the past decade and what it is likely going to mean for the coming decade. So first, environmental change and sustainability. Probably a megatrend that almost everybody is aware of. If you read the news on a daily basis, there's always some issue somewhere in the world which is being attributed to and a consequence of climate change and unsustainable practices. This became an issue really 200 years ago, in a sense, when humanity entered a completely different era with the discovery of fossil fuels as an abundant, cheap energy source and how that enabled the Industrial Revolution, new job types, new business models, and drove significant economic growth and population growth. The downsides were significant impact to environments, the degradation of environments, overconsumption of natural resources, pollution of air, water, and soil. And there are significant reasons to be concerned about this going into the future. We're seeing the great acceleration, that as population has increased astronomically over the past 150 years, right? And the way that we live on this planet has increased correspondingly. The way that we use water, right? The CO2 emissions that we generate, and the surface temperature of the Earth are impacting biodiversity, loss of rainforest and habitats, and even declining productivity yields of crops and the food that we eat. This is something to take very, very seriously. The sustainability of the planet, the only home we've ever known, depends upon the decisions that we make over the coming decades and how we're able to address, mitigate, and maybe even potentially solve this challenge. But there are reasons to be optimistic in addition to pessimistic. Right? Consumer values are shifting, attitudes are changing, people are demanding greener products, companies are inventing greener business models, regulatory authorities are putting in place stricter regulation, and even institutional investors, pension funds, investment funds, and so forth, are demanding that companies begin to think about their carbon footprint and how they address that and mitigate some of their impact and our collective impact on the planet. A case recently, because megatrends are interesting in theory, right, but we apply them in the practice that we do on a daily basis. The Danish government has committed to an extremely aggressive goal of reducing carbon emissions 70% by the year 2030. This is definitely something to shoot for. We'll see if it's achievable, but it's a moonshot and we're going for it. As a result, we recently had the opportunity to collaborate with Innovation Fund Denmark on sort of discussing what potential solutions could be, where maximum value was in Denmark, how science and business could collaborate together, and what solutions could look like and how Denmark could take a lead in moving forward with that. This report is publicly available. I would encourage you to go to cifs.dk in order to read more about this report in detail and this multi-stakeholder process and what came out of it in terms of innovation and environment and so forth. The second megatrend I want to talk with you about is the coming biotechnology revolution. The 20th century was in many ways the century of information technology, right? The arrival of information even as a concept, computing through mainframes and eventually personal computers, the rise of telephony and eventually digital telephony. The 21st century is likely going to be the century of biotechnology, and it is going to revolutionize the world in ways that are very difficult to anticipate at this point in time. The biotech revolution is the result of a convergence of a variety of trends. Genetic technology, the ability to both understand the genome and to edit it using CRISPR technologies and other technologies. The emergence of synthetic biology and the ability to manipulate organisms of a variety of types, as well as viruses and bacteria and what that enables. Bioinformatics, the arise of artificial intelligence, neural networks, deep learning systems, and their ability to look at large databases of information related to health outcomes and to analyze what potential solutions would be to increase healthcare efficiency, maximize cost usage, and guide people on the personal decisions that they make when thinking about their own health futures. It's very exciting to think about some of these things. It's also very concerning as well. We're moving into a world in the short term, this is not 30 or 40 years down the world, where malicious actors, non-state actors, maybe even high school teenagers in their garages are able to utilize synthetic biology in the same way that people of the past were able to utilize computer viruses. And if you in your garage can manipulate, right, a virus or a bacteria through gain of function synthetic biology techniques, well, we may be looking at a world where the next pandemic will not be naturally occurring. It very much may be human created. Part of what is enabling this, right, is the falling cost of sequencing the human genome. If we look at the past 20 years, right, the cost to sequence a human genome has fallen by a factor of 10,000. The illustration that you're looking at here is actually a logarithmic graph. So when you see a line that is relatively linear, what you're seeing is exponential decreases in cost. Every drop is a factor of 10. And we are now currently in a world where sequencing a human genome is in the hundreds of dollars, and it is rapidly approaching, in many cases, less than $100. If we look 30 years ago at mobile telephony, right, when it was just emerging, it didn't work particularly well, and it was quite expensive. We're now in a world where even the global poor have access to smartphones, and often some of the best smartphones on the planet. And that enables them to have access to all the information that humanity has ever created, to think about their futures and how they educate their children based upon this connectivity, and so forth. What will the world look like if in 10 to 20 years we're in a world where even the global poor, everyone can afford to have their genome sequenced? What does that world look like in terms of how people think about health and their behaviors? How will it impact healthcare systems, right, and the efficiency of those systems? How will it change who provides healthcare and so forth? Will it be privatized? Will it be public? Will it be somewhere in between? It is an interesting world to think about. And of course, cybersecurity and privacy concerns. Will people be willing to share their genomes in exchange for the benefits that they get? This is not the world of Facebook where you share your pictures and your friends list. There's a lot more at stake when you're sharing your genome and the basis of your biology. Part of this in applied foresight and thinking about the biotech revolution was a project we recently worked on with Roche, the Swiss pharmaceutical giant, on future-proofing healthcare and thinking about all the different factors that come into providing healthcare and health outcomes. As part of this, we developed a personalized health index. This report is also publicly available. You can find it at our website. But the report and the index attempted to quantify a variety of issues for how disparate stakeholders could think about collaborating on maximizing health outcomes. It was a multi-stakeholder process and led to a lot of insights, thought leadership, and even policy-making suggestions within this area, driven by the biotech revolution and the impact it will have on healthcare of the future. Finally, I'd like to talk with you about greater interconnectedness, connectivity. This is an area that has changed radically over the past decade with the emergence of smartphones and tablet technology, universal access to the internet, emerging 5G technology and high-speed bandwidth. And it is also something that is going to change even more radically in the coming decades, and not just driven by social media. We are at the dawn of the Internet of Things and the accompanying sensor technology, where devices and sensors by the billions or even trillions will be everywhere, gathering data in real time, enabling monitoring of complex systems, hopefully driving efficiency, and of course, running the risk of complex systems collapse. Depending on who you talk to, over the next 5 to 10 years, we're moving up toward 50 to 100 billion devices globally that will be connected to the internet. It is a significant multiple of the number of human beings that will be on this planet. And the number of sensors gathering data and feeding it into devices and systems for analysis may very well be in the trillions. Most of this growth is actually not going to come from some of the technologies that we know today, such as PCs and smartphones and tablets. A lot of it will come from consumer wearables, but also smart home devices and enterprise Internet of Things. So it raises the question, how do we feel about sensors and Internet of Things surveilling us, watching us in real time? This is going to, in some ways, this is already here with Amazon Alexa and other smart home speakers. It enables predictive analytics and making your life sufficiently easier and often cheaper, but it also potentially involves downsides if that data is hacked. In addition, are we willing to turn over the future of our transportation systems, of our cities, to this type of technology, where a small event in one particular place could lead to a large collapse in other places, whether energy and electricity grids, whether our wastewater systems, whether our food supply chains, and so forth. Global megatrends, as said, are neutral. There are positives, there are negatives. How it develops for us depends in a lot of ways on how we respond. So a final case study on applied foresight and taking this global megatrend and thinking about what it might mean for the future. One of our longtime strategic partners and clients is Pictet Asset Management. They are a large financial conglomerate based out of Geneva, and we had the opportunity to work with them on exploring the future of smart cities. All right. Smart cities will be enabled by sensors and Internet of Things, which are allowing this real-time data analysis and driving efficiency in transportation, both of individuals, goods, services, as well as water and waste treatment systems, food distribution and other distribution systems, and so forth. There's a lot of opportunity from an investment perspective to realize gains in these particular areas and to live much more efficiently in highly dense urban areas. But there's also significant risk from a cybersecurity perspective, as well as a complex systems perspective. And while we don't want to slow technology down, it needs to develop in a way that is trustworthy over time. Otherwise, you get into a place where you've realized significant interim gains followed by significant collapse and loss of societal trust in these types of highly efficient and often sustainable technologies. So, those are the 3 megatrends we wanted to introduce you to today, out of the 15 that are in the report, which we look forward to you reading. Ultimately, what we do comes down not to just an academic exercise, not just thinking about the trends themselves and having a discussion, although that's a great thing to do, and it's what we do in SIFs on a daily basis, sparring and debating and discussing and considering. It ultimately comes down to strategy and decision making and how we advise people about what they should do when undertaking these kinds of processes and thinking about future uncertainty. The reason that global megatrends are so important to us at SIFs is that they provide the foundation for every single thing that we do in the way of an advisory offering, a discussion, a collaboration, and so on. We always start with global megatrends when we're thinking about scenario planning based upon certain identified critical uncertainties and how that changes the way that you think about how the world could develop. Strategy and developing strategy. Strategy processes that rely only on predictions or empirical data often fall far short and run into very unexpected events. Global megatrends kind of expand the discussion and the conversation, right, to take into account broader considerations of what might inform your strategy process. Risk management. Risk management is often undertaken in organizations with a very quantified approach, focused on risks that are in themselves quantifiable or believed to be quantifiable. But megatrends help raise the issue of wildcards and black swans and emerging risks that are very difficult to understand and quantify in the moment, right? When they will develop, to what extent, what will their scope be, and how do we think about risk management within that broader context. And of course, innovation and maintaining long-term competitiveness, right? New products, new business models, new ecosystems, platform ecosystems, centralization and decentralization, and how your innovation process feeds into that. So the reason that we emphasize global megatrends is because it informs everything that we do when we think about the future or multiple futures, and how that should inform judgment and decision making in the present, right? But megatrends and correspondingly scenarios and the way those come together, right, should inform strategy, right? It's critical to challenging your assumptions, your mental models, right, and developing a resilient, agile business which is focused on organizational robustness. Of course, innovation, right? You want to enable knowledge, impact, and strategy tools that drive high-impact innovation. And of course, risk, expanding the focus to be more long-term and strategic and driving discussions about how you can prepare both for the short term, the medium term, and the long term, right? We work with all of our clients on a confidential basis for the most part, but there are a number of cases where we have collaborated and the results and conclusions of that collaboration have been released publicly. I provided a few examples here on using megatrends and doing applied future studies in Foresight to real-world problems. I would point you to our website, again, cifs.dk, where you can access all of these reports and read about the future of African migration, a report that we collaborated with the United Nations on. The white paper we developed with Innovation Denmark about climate solutions and mitigation, over the next 10 years and where Denmark's strengths are. The future of food, where we worked with Board BIA, the Irish Food Board, about Ireland's competitiveness globally in food and beverage over the coming 10 to 15 years. And of course, we have regenerative cities, the future of hydrogen, and so forth. So these are just a couple of examples of how we utilize global megatrends in order to inform decision-making and judgment around real-world problems. And you can read about how you can use global megatrends to apply to Foresight. So thank you very much. That was a brief overview of our framework and what's in our report. And as I said, we're very much looking forward to hearing back from you after you've read it, what you think. And with that said, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Nicklas, and we're going to take some questions from the audience that have been submitted and address those as we can. So, Nicklas?
We're going? Great. Thank you guys for this presentation and insights into the Megatrend framework that you've been developing. I've been collecting some questions from the audience and I will post them to you as I see fit, but you're of course welcome to engage in the conversation with each other. The first one is for you, Tim. And we have Hari who's asking, a really good question, I think, and I'm really interested in your response here. He's asking, with an aging global population contributing less to economic activity and Generation Z pushing for less work and more free time, where will economic growth come from in the future?
Well, thank you, Hari. That is an excellent question. And the intellectually honest answer on my part is that I don't know. And I think we can answer that we do not know where economic growth is going to come from in the future. Economic growth, as traditionally measured, is a combination of population growth and productivity factor growth, which is usually driven by technology and innovation in certain areas. If you look back over previous industrial revolutions, there was always this question of how new technologies and the job destruction that they drove would impact labor markets, productivity growth, and economic growth. And of course, there have always been new job types that have emerged out of those industrial revolutions that have contributed to continuing productivity growth and economic growth. Going forward, will that continue? I think we don't know. Will the fourth industrial revolution and so on involve net job creation or net job destruction? Will it be on balance a good thing or a bad thing? That remains to be seen. If we look at artificial intelligence and deep learning systems and robotics, the automation of labor, will that free us up from the drudgery of some of these jobs to undertake new forms of labor? Will people enjoy increased leisure? Will it enable a declining cost of living, a lower inflation, maybe even deflation, a world that we really don't know what looks like? That remains to be seen as well. But productivity growth, economic growth, the impact on labor markets, quality of living, and so forth, very difficult to forecast. You could find economists who will have developed 20, 30, 50-year models. I think we're a little more circumspect about thinking about economic growth in the long term based upon the global megatrends framework.
All right. Thank you for the intellectual honesty, Tim, and laying out the unpredictability of the future. We have the next question from a guy called Theo, and I'm going to ask that one to you, Casper. How does unexpected events such as COVID-19 influence the megatrends?
Thank you for that question, Theo. I think it's a really interesting one to think about. I think the boring answer would be in the long term, it might be too early to tell. But something that's been really interesting to me is how it seems to have accelerated certain trends and de-accelerated other trends. So you remember when the pandemic hit, there was a global decrease in emissions, carbon emissions, as a result of the global standstill in flights. That was very temporary. You know, the dive we saw quickly went up again, but it was nevertheless sort of a temporary reversion of trends, you could say. More permanently, I think it's been interesting to see how the whole working from home boom has, you know, in some ways been an acceleration of existing trends. We might have gotten where we are today 10, 15, 20 years down the line with the whole remote connectivity, working from home, metaverse, telepresence technologies, and so on. We might have gotten there, a decade or more down the line, but the pandemic has kind of hypercharged developments in some ways. So it's interesting to think about how it has, de-accelerated in some ways and accelerated in other areas. We have a freely available publication on CIFS.dk where we actually talk about the interplay between megatrends and the pandemic. And I encourage you to go to our site and have a read through it if you think that might be interesting. Perhaps someone from the Institute can send a link to it in the chat.
Thank you, Casper. We'll make sure that the pandemics report will be linked in the commentary right away. We'll move on with the next question, and that is for you, Tim.
All right.
Are you ready?
Yes.
That's from Hanne. Hanne wants to know, how do black swans play into the megatrend framework?
How do black swans play into the megatrend?
First of all, maybe what is a black swan?
Sure. Well, first of all, the term black swans, which has become honestly overused within the English language after Nassim Taleb's groundbreaking publication, The Black Swan, back in 2007, is basically an event that has never happened and is not anticipated. We're not able to happen. It's outside our range of experience. It's outside our data sets and so forth. People talk about COVID-19 and this global pandemic as if it is a black swan. It's not. We could anticipate that a pandemic was coming. There have been a lot of previous pandemics of a variety of types and scales and scopes. So black swans are things that we cannot anticipate. Maybe a more interesting question is wild cards. There's a difference between wild cards and black swans, and in a sense, the COVID-19 pandemic could be thought of as a wild card, something that we thought would happen eventually, but didn't know when it was going to happen. if we look back over the course of history, or at least the 20th century, right, the biggest, most highly impactful events have been black swans, right? Whether it was the summer of 1914, right, where there was no really conceptual understanding of what a world war was. And of course, everybody thought there was no possibility the world would go to war, and sort of ignored it, and things just sort of spiraled out of control in an unexpected way. World War II, right, the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall, the rise of the internet, and so forth. All these things were unanticipatable, and in some cases black swans because they had never happened before. So with that sort of acknowledged, the difference between wild cards and black swans, kind of highly impactful events that we can expect will happen periodically, and those we have never experienced before. The way that we think about those in relation to our global megatrends framework is that they exist separately from the trends. Trends analysis is really about taking what has happened in the past to some degree and how it might unfold to varying degrees in the future. You cannot strategize or plan always for black swans. If you're only strategizing or planning for World War III or the collapse of civilization or so forth, you're not going to get very far. It doesn't mean that wildcards and black swans should be ignored. They should be part of the process. But again, planning for the future and thinking about global megatrends involves plausibility and what we think is likely to happen over given time frames. So they're two very important things. They're distinct, right? But they can balance each other when you're thinking about the futures and how it will develop.
Right. Thank you, Tim. We'll move on to the next question here. Casper, can you tell us a little? Oh, it is Calvin asking, by the way. Sorry, Calvin. Can you tell us a little bit about what the process was behind developing this megatrend framework?
Thank you for that question, Calvin. I'm happy to, and feel free to jump in, Tim, if you also have some comments to that. I think there are some definite criteria we have discussed today. You know, we've discussed the time horizon, we've discussed the global impact, the scoping, and so on. Beyond that, there's obviously judgment calls involved in terms of what makes the cut or not. So there's a lot of internal discussion, a lot of filtering, a lot of debate, which is a necessary consequence of having an organization with 30 futurists from different diverse backgrounds and with as diverse opinions as well. So there's a long process of selection, and then there's a process of filtering based on how useful are the megatrends as analytical tools for the kinds of organizations that we work with and the kinds of challenges that are facing them. So we have a list of key research areas at CIFS, and the megatrends we have selected also reflect that. I guess you could say it's both a matter of agreeing, you know, which would be the most impactful trends in the 21st century, and then also a process of filtering in terms of you know, questions of practicality.
Do you have anything to add, Tim?
Yeah, I would just, to reiterate what Casper said, and I think what I alluded to in the presentation, there's no objective, structured, set in stone, one-size-fits-all approach to developing a universe of global megatrends. Ultimately, it is debate and discussion, it's filtering, it's assessing the qualitative along with the quantitative, but most importantly, it is about thinking or considering the relevance of global megatrends for decision makers engaged in strategic planning today, and sort of what informs that planning process and what leads to the best possible decisions given uncertainty that's associated with these trends.
Thank you, Tim. The next one is from Nina, and it regards sci-fi. And I'm going to ask you first, Casper, but I also want to hear your response afterwards, Tim. Nina asks, do you personally use any sci-fi books or films as inspiration to comprehend futures or future megatrends? Would you even be able to share a source?
That's a really excellent question. I love that question. I do personally, yes. I think I can speak for many of our colleagues in saying that science fiction is absolutely, an important part of thinking about the future. Going back to the early sci-fi writers, H.G. Wells and so on, you could say they were the first futurists in a way. They just hadn't formulated the methodology yet. That came later. But I think science fiction and future studies have a lot of commonalities. Obviously, science fiction is a little more loose, a little more focused on the storytelling, and a little less focused on, rigidity of analyses and so on. But still, there's a lot of commonalities. And I think the main and most interesting commonality to me has to do with how we construct visions of the future. So as futurists, we like to work with scenarios as sort of a storytelling device that combines analyses and backcasting, but also, creative interpretation. So scenarios are sort of snapshots of possible futures. A lot of megatrends go into constructing scenarios, but also a lot of narrative and storytelling. And science fiction is exactly that as well. It's narrative storytelling about the future that may come to pass. And interestingly enough, science fiction has in recent years made it into sort of an organizational strategy. If any of you are watching from the US, you might be familiar with some of the agencies operating over there that actually offer science fiction narrative prototyping as a service to companies and organizations who want to develop their strategy. And in practice, it works in a very similar way to when we as futurists construct scenarios. It's a way to probe and provoke people to think about the future in new ways, by presenting a vision of a future that may be radically different than what you may have in mind yourself. So I think science fiction and future studies are intimately connected in a number of different ways.
Do you have a source you would like to recommend?
I would say read Kim Stanley Robinson's 2312. It's really a brilliant piece of work that engages with some of the questions that are most pressing for us today, and some of the megatrends we've been discussing here as well, especially when it comes to environmental change and sustainability. And what I really love about him is that he does not get stuck in the doom and gloom and the dystopia. He's the kind of author who will think beyond the long term, 300 years into the future, but will think in terms of solutions and positive alternatives. So how do we get out of the climate crisis? How could we terraform Earth in a future where it might have been the environment might have been degraded to such a degree that it's a necessity, but never doom and gloom, always looking at the possibilities and the potential positive outcomes as well. So I would recommend you read some Kim Stanley Robinson.
And you, Tim, brief recommendation.
Brief recommendation. 3 authors.
Okay.
Isaac Asimov, I, Robot, which everybody is familiar with. Not necessarily that it predicts the future, but the takeaway is that oftentimes what we think is going to be a utopian future and how we think we can control it gets out of our hands. Frankenstein is a very similar work. I would also recommend, he's not a sci-fi author, he is a historian, but he is deeply involved in scenario planning, and that is Niall Ferguson. He has written a range of books, historical books, which are excellent, and often draws parallels between what has happened historically and what could happen in the future. History, it rhymes, so it never repeats itself, but it does rhyme, and there's a lot of takeaways to be generated from the study of history, and I think Niall Ferguson does a great job of that.
All right, thank you. I hope that answers the question. To Nina, I have another one. Before we have to wrap up this Q&A, there's a lot of questions, and I really have to say to the participants that they can engage with Casper and Tim after this webinar as well, of course. Future seminar, as we should say, from this point. There's a really interesting question, Tim, from Camilla. It's regarding the paradox of increased interconnectedness and the increase in social disconnectedness. Where we even see that there is problems with loneliness and mental health, even though we feel more connected than ever before.
Right.
What's your take on that?
I think that this is a phenomenon, the sense of disconnectedness and loneliness and angst, the increase in the prevalence of depression and anxiety and other social conditions, particularly among younger generations. I don't think this is something that just began with the connectivity revolution and with social media. This goes way back, and depending on who you talk with, you will get a very different perspective. But as you went through the 50s and 60s and saw the decline of traditional institutions, whether it was churches, church membership, church attendance, whether it was the decline in civic participation and people feeling involved in their communities and their organizations, when it was the migration of children away from their parents and the communities where they were raised into dense urban areas where there were great economic opportunities, but not so much in the way of a social network where you could feel connected to your neighbors. Social trust and a sense of loneliness increased, and it's been a decades-long phenomenon. It's covered in an excellent way by Robert Putnam in the book Bowling Alone, which I would also highly recommend. But certainly social media and connectivity and the impact it's had, particularly on the younger generations, has kind of driven this. Will that continue in the future? That remains to be seen. Will people have a greater sense of community and connectedness if they inhabit virtual worlds, right? If the metaverse or whatever comes along? Will younger generations coming after, the current young generations, will they be better able to cope and adapt to these kinds of technology because it will be more a part of their life? To be determined. And certainly there's going to be movements where individuals rebel against technology and connectivity, and they seek more traditional forms of living. So that's
all right.
That's the answer.
First, thanks to you, both of you, Tim, Casper. We're going to wrap up this Q&A now because we have one more thing that we need to get through before we are through this first Futures seminar. As I just mentioned, you can continue the conversation. Is the future hybrid? Tim and Casper on CIFS at cifs.dk. Before I hand the word over to Matthias to talk about the Futures membership, first here's a little video. Is the future hybrid? Is it immersive or regenerative? Become a Futures member to explore, understand, and act on your future. Futures members gain access to the Institute's Futures seminars, where we tackle Futures-related topics through presentations, discussions, and external expert panels. As a member, you also gain access to our publications archive, 4 issues of Scenario Quarterly, and exclusive discounts to our renowned courses, which can teach you the Foresight mindset, letting you take full advantage of the future. At the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, we equip and inspire individuals and organizations to act on the future today. Sign up now and start unfolding the world of tomorrow.
Hi, I'm the head of partnerships and memberships here at the Institute. We just launched a new Futures membership where you as an individual get the chance to unlock the world of tomorrow today. I just saw someone in the comment section while following this seminar asking where you could own your skills and develop your skills within Future Studies. And I think Futures membership is a great place to start. As a Futures member, you get access to insights and inspiration. You can broaden your horizon and about future possibilities and stay updated on key trends and developments in society. As part of the Futures membership, we send you 4 editions of our new Scenario Quarterly, our new super publication that combines the best of our previous publications into one. The next one will be about the future of work. Just a little teaser for those of you who were curious. Then you also get unlimited access to our digital knowledge archive on our website, where we have previous reports, recordings of webinars, articles, and so on. And you can attend all 10 yearly Future seminars, where our futurist and expert guests share their insights about the future and about a variety of different topics. Also, you can upgrade your skills, as I mentioned. You get a 10% discount to our courses. We have, at the moment, we have our Applied Strategic Foresight course, where you learn to apply Foresight in a structured manner develop skills and learn how to understand dynamics of change, build scenarios, and use it for decision making and planning. Right. So to sum up the whole webinar a bit, just to make sure that you remember what you have learned today, megatrends, they're high-level change drivers with a significant influence on the future of global societies over the coming decades. They're interconnected due to their massive scale and impact, and they have a typical lifetime of at least 10 to 15 years. Also, they're the only relative certainty we have in a world that is highly uncertain. And I have 3 key takeaways for you as well. So first, it's important to remember that future shaping trends, they're interrelated, they're interdependent, as Timothy said. They have varying time spans and levels of influence, and they move all the time. The future is determined by the interaction of both stable trends, such as some of the megatrends, and also more unstable forces of change, so usually to do with human decision making. And then finally, understanding megatrend trajectories and the megatrend framework is critical for every decision maker, both on an individual level to understand the world around us that's becoming increasingly complex, but also on an organizational level to prepare for the futures ahead of us. Our report that the whole future seminar is about, it will be available online today, and you can pre-order the report, the print version. It will be released February 16th. I hope you will all get the opportunity, and I think you also have a 10% discount for this one if you're not members. Finally, our next future seminar is hosted by Nicklas, who you met today, who has the guest speakers Lois Damhoff, a futurist literacy consultant with UNESCO, and Raul Correa-Smith, who's the content director at the Museum of Tomorrow International. I'm personally looking very much forward to the next session as well, about public participation, democratizing futures, and also in terms of futurist literacy, how can individuals develop the skills to actively work with the future and prepare. Already now you can sign up on our webpage, and there will also be a QR code right after the webinar that you can use. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been really exciting, this first future seminar, and feel free to send us an email. Any feedback, any questions are welcome. We're looking to get in touch with you and hear what you thought of this seminar. And see you in the future.